All right, Helen Joyce, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Okay, so you are a journalist and you're an advocate for women's sex-based rights, and you've written extensively about gender and transgender issues. I just want to know, where did this start for you?
Where it started for me was when I was working at The Economist. I was there from 2005 to 2022, and in 2017 I was editing a section of the paper that's called the International section. And that's not the foreign section, which has all the foreign news. It's specifically in The Economist. We try to run a piece every week that looks at something really cross-cutting, like a global trend of some sort. And it was a very interesting section to edit, all sorts of stuff like about nuclear disarmament or how you deal with the Arctic and Antarctic, or those sorts of things that just don't fit into business, finance, science, or geographical regions. And in a fateful day in 2017, a senior editor sat next to me at lunch and said, why do her kids actually keep coming home and saying that such and such is trans now? And I had heard about, the occasional transsexual, old-fashioned word, and I had never given it any thought, but I was under the impression that there were some people who, I guess I'd never said the expression born in the wrong body, but that's probably what I thought without thinking. But I had never heard of a child saying that, and I had no idea why a child might. So I just said to her, I'll go off and I'll look into it. And I got kind of fascinated. So I guess I was plenty of people were there before me, but the real turning point was probably 2015, which is when American newspapers and magazines were putting trans everywhere, and it's only ramped up since. But it was a global trend and still is a global trend. And you could sum it up as saying that there's a novel belief system that you can be someone who is born male, or as they would say, assigned male at birth, but you're really a woman. Or you're born female and you're really a man. Or that it's possible to be non-binary, like not one sex or the other. And that all of this is determined by what you say about yourself, what you feel about yourself, and not just the given nature of the body that you were conceived as. And this struck me as just bizarre, So I started to write about it, and I ended up writing a book about it because I became so engrossed by what it did to women's rights and to child safeguarding and to gay people's rights. So that's the short version.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about that. So you seem to believe there's a conflict between transgender rights and women's rights. Let's explore that. What are the main conflicts you see?
So I straight away, I don't agree with the framing, because transgender people, some are women and some are men, like meaning male and female. So there's no conflict between women's rights and the rights of women who identify as trans, that is female people. It's specifically that you can't have women's rights if men can insist that they can come into women's spaces because they say they're women. So a lot of law and a lot of public policy is written as if the sexes are entirely symmetric, and in many ways we are. But in some ways we're not. And those ways are related to reproduction. Like really, obviously, every baby that has ever lived grew in a woman's body. That doesn't mean that every woman has to have a baby. It just means that only women carry the burden of reproduction. Women are weaker physically. We're the sex that gets raped. Men are much more violent than women. They commit most violent crime and nearly all sexual crime. And if you want women to be able to take full part in a modern society, to be able to leave the home, to go into workplaces, you have to take account of genuine sex differences. You have to have women-only spaces for the places and times where women are unusually or extra vulnerable to male predation. And that was actually one of the big fights of the early women's rights campaigners. The first girls who worked in factories didn't have access to toilets, and they had to fight for them because the toilets that they used, or, going the street, that was a time that they got raped and they would have to go together.
Yeah, and most people understand that. Most people understand there are sort of sex differences, men are stronger than women. So just to be clear, your stance is transgender women are like, I don't even want to say it.
Yeah, I know you don't want to say it. I'll say it for you. I'll say it for you. Just to clarify the terminology, lots of people are very confused about the terminology. There was polling done in the UK, I think it was earlier this year, but it might have been late last year, where they asked people what they understood by the phrases trans woman and transgender woman. And more than a third of people didn't actually get it right. Like, they didn't understand that that's somebody who's born male who identifies as a woman. Lots of them said they didn't know. And lots of them said that a trans woman is a woman who identifies as a man. And so whenever you see polling about, should transgender women be able to use women's spaces, you have to remember that a third of people don't know what you're talking about. They literally don't realise that you're talking about a man who identifies as a woman. So the sentence you don't want to say, and which I am very, very happy to say, is transgender women are men. That's factual. I tried to say the sentence, a trans woman, that is, a man who identifies as a woman, because I don't think it's pejorative, it's factually accurate, and people remember what you're talking about. When I started doing reporting on this, the first question that many of my colleagues and other people I spoke to would ask me is, they might remember at the beginning of the conversation what it meant, but at some point during the conversation, they would say, hang on, which way around is it? Is a trans woman a woman who identifies as a man or a man who identifies as a woman? People get very confused.
Well, I also think people don't want to, it's such a politicized topic these days, so people just don't want to say, people want to be politically correct, or they don't want to say the wrong thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not a coincidence that this is a field that's a linguistic minefield. Like, it's been made that way. People have been made to think that saying trans women are men is like using the N-word. But there's nothing wrong with being a man. Half of all of humanity is male. I mean, I'm a heterosexual woman. I'm a married woman. I'm married to a man. I have 2 sons. I have 5 brothers. I have a father. I love them all. They're great people. I have nothing against men. There's nothing wrong with being a man. And I mean, by itself, there's nothing wrong with being a man who identifies as a woman. I just kind of wonder what he means by that. My problem is only when that man takes his identification to mean that the rest of us have to accept an identity claim that's just counterfactual. It is just counterfactual to say a man can become a woman. And if he uses his claim to come into women's spaces, they cease to be women's spaces.
What you're saying sounds logical. I suppose what I'm trying to understand is why, and if we can just expand, why is it so important to differentiate between these terms? Why can't we just include transgender woman in female spaces? Or why can't we just, even though most of us know they are, well, I'll say it, biological male, why can't we just refer to them as woman? Like, what is the main issue here? Let's just expand on all your features.
Sure. So any policy or rule or law is written in words. And you can't trouble the meanings of the words and still have a clear-cut rule, policy, or law. So if some men who say that they're women thereby count as women, well, which men? And how can we tell? I mean, we can tell whether people are men or women by looking at them, like really nearly always. I accept that a woman who takes a lot of testosterone may really appear to be male, but you can very, very rarely do you get a man who tries to feminize who looks like a woman. So these things like female-only spaces rely on us being able to say, this person is male, this person is female, the male person is not welcome in here. And if there are some men who are welcome, some special men, because they say that they're women, well, how do we police that? There's nothing objective here. It's just about how they feel or what they say. So if you allow the occasional man in because he says he's a woman, then you've opened the door to any man who's willing to say he's a woman. And suddenly you don't have single-sex spaces. I
remember having this moment, about 2 or 3 years ago. But I've questioned myself and I've sort of tried to reanalyze it. And I am at a place where I'm like, is this issue that big? And have you ever questioned yourself and wondered, are you in an echo chamber? Is this issue sort of amplified and made out to be bigger than it is? I know you're plucking out cases where, there is a interference and there are males entering female spaces. And by that, I mean men. I don't mean transgender women. But yeah, there are definitely examples there of trans women, so biological males in female prisons. But I'm concerned it's not as prominent or it's not happening as much as people believe it's happening. Have you ever sort of questioned yourself on this?
Yeah, I think you asked 2 different questions there. You ask, am I in an echo chamber? Do I worry that I am? And is it a big issue? So I worry about the echo chamber all the time. And in particular, it's very difficult to talk to people who disagree with me on this because they universally say that I'm a Nazi, I'm hateful, I'm, the maddest things, like that I'm an anti-Semite or something. Like, where they get that one from? And I'd love to sit down and talk to people who disagree with me on this. And I try, and the invitation is out there and has been out there since 2017 and almost never has been taken up. The other question, I'm really certain that this is a big issue. And the reason, well, the first reason is just that it's easy to look at a system that was set up one way and then you introduce a loophole into it and you wait a couple of years and you say, oh, but nothing bad has happened. Actually, big societal changes take decades to play out. So what we've done by saying that any man who says he's a woman can come into women's spaces, it's not going to be clear how many men will do that for quite a while, because men now were brought up and born at a time that you didn't do that, and most men have never even thought about it. But if you open a loophole, it's the worst people who go through it. So if you think about, and this is, it's always difficult to do analogies in this because people really deliberately misunderstand you. So if you think about safeguarding, think about keeping children safe. If you've ever gone into schools, at least in the UK, you have to do safeguarding checks. They look to see your criminal record and so on. And they do it for everybody, 100% of everybody. And the reason is because when they didn't do that, precisely the wrong people came in. So I was brought up in Ireland and, you know, as we all know, the Catholic Church had paedophiles hiding within it. And I'm old enough to remember people saying of priests that they wouldn't do such a thing. That those were men who had taken vows of chastity, for example, and you were told that you were anti-Catholic, you were anti the church, that you were causing trouble, you know, etc., etc., if you said that there were bad people in the priesthood and in the various holy orders. And then they learned, you know, you don't need very many people to use a loophole when people are being harmed by it. And the people who use the loophole are precisely the worst people. And the longer you leave the loophole open, the wider it gets and the more people come through it. So if you say that a man who says he's a lesbian can come into lesbian-only spaces, or a man who says that he's the mother of his child, not the father, can come into a breastfeeding support charity, you won't get the average man. You also won't get very many men, but you will every now and then get one man, and he will be a very, very, very bad person. He will be the sort of man who knowingly and deliberately and taking delight in it likes to overstep women's boundaries. And you only need one. If you have one man who comes into a breastfeeding support organisation, I'm thinking of one particularly, La Leche League at the moment now says that men who identify as women can come to its support groups, which are women only, mother only, where you, by the way, you take your top off a lot of the time, you know. Just one man coming into a space like that ruins it for every woman. Ruins it for every woman that those women tell to. The women will self-exclude. Other women will get to hear about it. Very quickly, the whole thing is destroyed because there's a social trust issue here. When you go into a women's space, you expect there to be, you know, I often joke about it and say, no unexpected penis in the bagging area. You know, the thing they say when you put your shopping down in the wrong place at the supermarket. You know, just happening once is absolutely traumatizing for people. And even the possibility that it could happen in somewhere like a breastfeeding support group, a rape crisis centre, a domestic violence shelter, women will self-exclude. So one man can really pollute the pool for a lot of people, and they're all women, remember. So, you know, even if it's a small issue in terms of numbers, it's a large issue in terms of being able to run society in the way that women need it to be run.
Okay. And the Echochamber question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just try and read everything that they write. I watch their videos. I think when I see what they try to write about what I think or what people on my side think, I realise they have literally no idea. Like, they laughably misattribute absurd ideas to gender critical women. I mean, that's the expression that's used for better or for worse, gender critical. But I spend ages trying to understand what they're thinking and doing and trying to rebut it and honing arguments and so on. I mean, they've had the mic now for the last 10 years. You know, it's everywhere. Trans women are women, no debate. You know, you can't get away from it. So I just have to try, but I wish that we could talk head to head more, because whenever I talk to anybody about this, actually, it doesn't have to be someone who particularly disagrees with me. You know, you learn a lot from talking to other people. They see it differently. They ask you questions that you don't ask yourself in your own head. There's a lovely theory of human intelligence that no one person on their own is intelligent. That we become very stupid if we just think on our own. We think by talking and listening and debating. You know, the Socratic method could be very useful in this field, but, you know, they've absented themselves from the fray.
I meet a lot of transgender people. I'm in the arts world. There seems to be a difference between transgender people and the activism surrounding
totally.
it. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Expand on that.
I mean, most people who would call themselves trans activists and including a lot of the people who are most toxic, like the people who, you know, report journalists to their employers and try to get women sacked in that, they're not trans. I think a lot of them are just bandwagon jumpers. They're people who are virtue signaling. A lot of it's, women who are trying to show themselves to be, more virtuous than thou in industries like publishing, where, which have gone into real purity spirals of all sorts on race, on gender, on transgender. And then there's people who want this to be gay rights 2.0 because they missed gay rights 1.0. Like people who are on the wrong side of the fight to give gay people equal civil rights and to bring about equal marriage. Some of those people, are trying to refight the battle, and they think this is the next one, and they can be unbelievably gung-ho on this. And also there's just a bunch of people who really, really love a chance to give women a bloody good kicking. And especially middle-aged women. Like a lot of sexism is ageism. It's middle-aged women and old women who are specifically disliked. And, and by the way, when you're middle-aged is when you start finding it easiest to call men out on their bullshit. So that's why, young women still have value in a society that values women's beauty and women's fertility. But once you're past being beautiful and fertile, you're just meant to stay quiet, darn socks, cook dinners, staff old age care homes, whatever. Keep quiet, definitely. And so there's a bunch of men who really like to, just shout those women down and tell them that they're nasty, mean bitches for not budging up for the lovely women, the better women, the stronger, more interesting women, the ones with penises. So that's the activists. Somebody who identifies as trans, if they're using spaces they're not entitled to, I don't approve of it. If what they're doing is dressing differently, expressing themselves differently, exploring their identity, I'm all there for that. That's great. I don't see why you have to say you're trans to do any of that. But hey, people say and do all sorts of things I don't agree with, and that's fine in a liberal society.
Yeah, totally true. All right, well, let's try and sort of unpack this idea of gender. This idea of gender identity, and gender ideology, because you talk about it extensively in your book and your research. What is this concept of gender in your view? What does that mean?
Gender itself as a freestanding word I try not to use because I think it's got too many different meanings. Like most people who use it just mean sex, and they're trying to avoid saying sex, or else they're saying a sentence where sex is ambiguous because it might mean sexual intercourse. Americans in particular use the word gender instead of sex. So if it just means sex, then it's better to say sex because it's become multi-meaning. Sometimes people use it to mean the observable and stable differences in interests, tastes, styles, and so on between the two sexes, which are seen in every society, by the way. And sometimes we'll use it for the cultural ones, like it's not true that every culture has, men with short hair and women with long hair, or women wearing dresses and men wearing trousers. There are cultures that are the other way around. It's not true that pink is female coded in every society, whatever. You could call those things gender as well. I would say, my best definition of gender would be the sort of the patterns and expectations that go with being male or female. And most people are pretty gender conforming, if that's your definition. Like, not very gender conforming. Am I gender conforming? I've got long hair, I'm heterosexual. However, I have a PhD in mathematics. I like babies. Like everybody, I'm a mixture. But statistically speaking, there are observable patterns, and there are observable patterns in things like interest in mathematics, interest in being with children or people, and so on. So you could call that gender. And then gender identity, the phrase was created by people when it was about the 1960s, 1970s, a couple of sexologists who believed that over the first couple of years of a child's life, they developed an awareness of whether they were boys or girls with all the baggage that came with that. And they were more interested in the baggage than in the body. So they believed that little boys in their first couple of years of life learned to be leaders, outgoing, rough and tumble, all that sort of thing. And girls learned to be passive, pretty, dainty, interested in helping their mums, that sort of thing. And that was what made you a boy or a girl. That was your gender identity. That was the phrase they used. And they believed that you could bring up any child to have the gender identity, male or female, as long as you just told them right at the beginning. And from that grew this idea that it's about the behaviours and the styles much more than the body. And then it moved from being about the behaviours and styles to just being some sort of ineffable soul. Like when you hear trans activists now talking, they say that your own gender identity. Well, how do you know your own gender identity? Well, you feel it, but I only feel like me. I can't feel like anybody else. So how do I know if the way I feel feels like a man or feels like a woman? What is a man saying when he says, I feel like a woman? I think it has to come back to stereotypes. He has to be saying that he's not comfortable fitting in the social role of a man. But my answer to that would be the social role should be expanded then. You're still a man. Grow your hair long, wear makeup, do whatever it is you think you can't do, go to ballet lessons, whatever. You're still a man. We can't change that.
So it seems like you're saying if we don't fit the gender role of our biological sex, gender ideology suggests that we might be the opposite sex.
Yeah. And if I say this to somebody, the occasional time I've managed to say this to somebody who's on the opposite side of this debate, they tell me I'm misunderstanding, that it's much more subtle than that. But if you look at what they write, if you ever look at what trans people say about how they knew how a woman knew she was really a man, or how a boy really knew he was a girl, whatever, it always goes straight to the hair and the clothes. And, and then I think it probably feels like you're trying to express something from inside yourself in the hair and clothes. But without the hair and clothes, what is it? I think it's actually very old fashioned and sexist to say that if a woman doesn't want to perform womanhood, she wants to perform the things that are associated with men. I, for example, have had a pretty masculine career. I moved abroad as a foreign correspondent and brought my family with me, and my husband had a dependent visa and he looked after the kids while we were in Brazil. And as I say, I have a PhD in mathematics. Does that mean I'm living the social role of a man? To me, it means a woman can do much more than people used to think that women can do. And to me, that's the gender expansive thing to do. I think I'm the gender expansive person because I don't deny that I'm a woman, but I don't let it hold me back. I do what I feel like. So it's kind of the reverse of trans ideology,
It's weird because I sort of feel like we got there, right? I feel like women, we're not homemakers anymore. We're out in the workforce. I work with tradies. Right? I fucking love it. Just lifting shit and bashing shit and getting the hammer and smashing shit. I'm like, it's so funny because in my brain I actually associate myself with men when I'm doing that. Or if I'm the masculine role in my, lesbian relationships, I also make an association in my brain that I'll just use the word, I play the man. It's not, it's an interesting language thing, but I sort of wonder why. I can almost relate to trans men.
Well, of course, nearly everybody who identified as trans early on was gay. So if you look back at what the word transsexual came from a German sexologist, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was pre-Second World War. He obviously was Jewish with a name like Hirschfeld, and the Nazis chased him out of Germany and he died, penniless and alone. In his Berlin clinic, he was a gay man himself, and he used to go to drag queen, he was a drag performer. Well, I say performer, it wasn't for public, it was just in a club. And he was a very early, what we would now call a gay rights campaigner. And he thought, as did anybody at the time who thought that gay men weren't just perverts who needed to be, straightened out somehow or put to death or whatever they believed. He believed that gay men were men with women's souls. That's the expression they used. And they called them psychic hermaphrodites. So they really felt that was their meaning of being a woman in a man's body, was being a man who wanted to have receptive sex, I should say, with other men, playing the woman's role, And now we don't conceive of that as being anything to do with having a womanly identity of any sort. We just say they're gay. And then he noticed that there were some other men who weren't gay, but who were very driven to cross-dress and had very strong fantasies about changing their bodies to be female, and they wanted rid of their male genitalia. And indeed, he oversaw the first couple of operations that were done like that. They were not at all successful. You'll know about one of them if you've seen the film The Danish Girl with Eddie Redmayne in it. Yeah, and it's a very sanitized version of what happened. The poor man, they did this before they understood blood types, before they had antibiotics, before they understood about sepsis. They transplanted ovaries taken from a young woman into his body and cut off his male genitalia, and then tried to put some uterine tissue in as well. And he lived about 14 months in really horrific pain and died of presumably of sepsis. So he understood that there were some men who were very strongly driven to desire to be in a woman's body. And I'd say that the development since then has seen those as two very separate paths, that there are men who want, there are gay men, and then there are men who want women's bodies. And yeah, so trans activism has come out of the second of those streams, but actually it's the first stream that's very gender non-conforming. These men who want to have these operations on themselves are often very gender conforming. Like they're often middle-aged men who were in the army, or they were engineers, or they were big businessmen or whatever. You can see them all over the place. But the men who are highly gender non-conforming are gay. And that's because there's a very strong correlation between growing up to be gay and being very gender non-conforming as a child. And we've forgotten that, but I mean, that's actually one of the best attested results in all this field. Like little boys who, if their parents, if you can get, there's this questionnaire you can do. You ask the parent a whole load of behaviours that are stereotypically associated with the two sexes, like do they like playing with trucks, do they like playing with dolls, that sort of thing. And little boys who are highly, highly gender non-conforming, as in they fit the pattern that little girls normally fit, they're about 25 times more likely to grow up gay. I mean, that's a big difference. Like plenty of them grow up straight, but loads of them grow up gay. But they realise during puberty what makes them different.
Interesting. Is the same true for young girls as well, who sort of exhibit?
There's an interesting thing about gender and girls. Girls are more gender non-conforming than boys. That's a general pattern. And the reason is that gender conforming behaviour for girls is so highly restrictive. So if you list these things, it's, likes makeup, likes pretty clothes, likes ballet, doesn't like rough and tumble. It's absolutely tedious. Like to be a really gender conforming girl is to restrict yourself to a tiny part of all the things that children like. So girls are much more gender non-conforming in general than boys are, because the gender roles are so yickily tight.
The constraints are tighter.
Or the description is tighter. Funnily enough, we punish gender non-conforming behaviour by boys more than by girls.
Yeah.
So it's quite complex. So the way that boys are described is, being leaders, wanting to take charge. Like, that's actually quite human. Most people want to do that. If you ever watch children play, they're all trying to boss it around. It's a big part of your learning when you're little, is that you have to play with other people. What I'm saying is that if you list the stereotypical behaviours of boys and girls, the girls' ones are much more tedious and much more constraining. So there's an artifactual reason that girls look like they're gender non-conforming. Whereas the boys' ones, a lot of them are quite attractive and most children want them. So it's harder to be a gender non-conforming boy according to the list. However, a little boy who is gender non-conforming, who prances around the place and wants to put on his mum's lipstick and, says he wants to play the harp and doesn't like rugby and cries a lot and plays with dolls, that little boy can be quite badly punished, and in particular by their father a lot of the time, compared to the little rough and tumble girl who says she likes climbing trees and playing rugby, and that people go, oh, she's a tomboy. Like, you can hear the difference. Like, compare the words sissy and tomboy. Like, one of them, it's the most horrible thing to call a little boy, whereas tomboy, oh, she's a tomboy, Anyway, so that was a long way of saying it's much harder to get the answer for gender non-conforming behaviour for girls, because girls are more gender non-conforming because the list is so shit. But if you think of really genuinely super gender non-conforming little girls, the little girls who express contempt for everything to do with girls, the little girls who, like, I've a lot of brothers. I'm the eldest of a very large family. And I can tell you all my brothers played with dolls, but what they did with them is they pulled their legs off and hit things with them and pretended they were guns. So if you're a little girl like that, she's quite likely to grow up lesbian, yes. Much more likely than your average girl.
And with these, what you're just saying about the boys like to rip the hair off but the Barbies and stuff. I mean, a lot of people think gender, in my circles anyway, is a social construct. As a society has constructed these ideas of gender, but it makes it, and then some people believe it's biological. Like boys just are more prone to rough and tumble because of biology. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, but I think there's a lot of biology in there. And if we start from first principles, so I recently interviewed Richard Dawkins on stage, and for that I had to go back and read some of my favourite of his books and also his most recent one. And one of the themes through them is that evolution is exquisitely parsimonious, meaning that any teeny tiny advantage that can be got is got. So the idea that women and men would be equally interested in babies when women are 100% of all the people who have to get pregnant for 9 months and then look after the baby, that's for the birds. Of course evolution made women more interested in babies than men are. Like, it'd be madness not to. Whatever amount men are interested in babies, women benefit, and the babies benefit, and survival of the species, of your descendants benefits if women are interested more. So of course there's going to be some biological basis. And then if you think of the other physical differences between men and women, you can see the effects of deep time, higher levels of violence in men's bodies compared with women's. So men have much thicker skulls. The way that men's brow is shaped, their eyes are more deep set, and that's to protect from the effect of a punch. Men's jaws are much thicker and stronger and much harder to hurt. Their necks are much stronger. Women get whiplash much more easily in car crashes. All of this is to do with the fact that, men through evolutionary time have been punching each other and hitting each other and fighting in a way that women have not been. So, of course, these things that we can see on our bodies are going to be in our psyches, if I can use that word as well. A friend of mine, actually, who's lesbian, said to me that she disagrees with both trans activists and radfems. She said the trans activists think that evolution didn't work from the neck down, and the radfems think evolution didn't work from the neck up. I think evolution worked everywhere. All of that said, there is no doubt but that society constrains all of us in ways that are beyond our biology. Sometimes it's related to our biology. Like, if women are going to be looking after the babies, societies say, oh, that's lovely. She likes it. She likes being woken up at night. She likes washing socks. Absolute bullshit. All boring, tedious shit. And then there's just the things like the coded stuff, like pink and blue and long hair and short hair and so on. But I mean, there's definitely, I just say one more sentence, there's definitely a strong biological substrate to this. And I do think that the fact that gay people are gender non-conforming before, and this is at age 2 or 3, that this is already visible, long before those children can really have absorbed in great detail what society is telling them. And you ask yourself, why did other children absorb it and they didn't? No, it's biological, a lot of it.
So being gay, you think is gender non-conformity
well, the evidence
is biological?
Does appear to be that there's a biological basis. Not entirely, not only. It's complex. It's not a gay gene or anything like that. But there are theories. So if you've got if you're a boy, again, these things have always been studied more in boys than in girls. I think partly because lesbianism is more complex. Like, women's sexuality is just much more complex than men's, both gay and straight women.
How so?
Oh God, a load of ways. Let's put a pin in that and I'll just finish the sentence about it. They studied the boys because most men are really either gay or straight. And, gay male sexuality has been so punished legally that it's kind of an attractive thing to study. It's a really clear-cut thing, And if you've got, the more older brothers you have, the more likely you are to be gay, which suggests that there's something about the environment in the womb. So there's really interesting things like that that suggest that there is a biological element to being gay, but it's complex and it's really not about a gay gene. So don't take that away from what I'm saying. You asked why women's sexuality is much more complex. Men are kind of basic. Like, the way men say things like, oh, I'm a legs man, oh, I'm a tits man, They really are like that. And I mean, you could say it's evolutionary, women are clearly fertile for a set period of our lives, and that is signalled by growing curves and then going through menopause, which is kind of visible if you aren't in clothes, and if you're in a prehistorical society where people aren't dressed, you can really tell who's still fertile and who isn't. And so men are just very cued on the physical correlates of being a fertile woman. And it's very much about the body and about signs of youth, but not too young. Like, that's your man, Whereas women, because men can be fertile right through their life cycle. And what a woman in a prehistorical society wants is she wants a man who will give her resources, because on her own, she and the baby are both going to die, basically. But those resources could be that he's strong, that he's a good hunter, that he's got, whatever money is in that society, that he's got status. So women look at far more varied cues when deciding whether they think a man is attractive. And that seems to somehow leak into a kind of that women are more fluid in their sexuality. And a lot more women, for example, have what appear to be happy marriages to a man for 20-something years, have kids, and then settle down again quite happily with a woman in their 40s or 50s. This is not a normal habit, a normal pattern for men at all. Like any man who comes out later in life will tell you that he was having gay sex when he was younger.
Right. That's so interesting. And I have heard the statistic. I don't know how true it is, but this person said there are twice as many gay men as there are lesbian, but twice as many bisexual women as there are bisexual men, but it might be even more. Yeah. But it resonated with me because I see that in the culture as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're just much more complex and interesting than men are.
Let's get back to the gender stuff. So, what do you wrote in your book about, because people often use these arguments that gender was more fluid in sort of prehistoric society, or like in other cultures, you have the Fa'afafine, you've got the Two-Spirit, you've got the Hijra, like in all these other cultures, gender nonconformity exists. So it can't just be this like Western concept. But how do you think they relate or interact with each other, like cross-culturally?
I mean, I think it's just, I don't agree with most of the times that people say something is cultural appropriation, but this is cultural appropriation. So if we think of the examples that get cited the most, Fa'afafine, Mouche, Hijra, all of those are in intensely gender conformist, not just conforming, conformist societies, patriarchal societies where women are often just given in marriage by their menfolk. There's no possibility of a woman owning land, being the leader, any of those things. So they're hugely gender conformist societies where the male role and the female role are extraordinarily different. But you've still got gay men. And those gay men are incredibly disruptive in a society like that. There's just no place for them. So they're treated as exceptions. They're treated as a third category. So Fa'afafine is the Samoan category, and it actually means in the manner of a woman. So a boy who in this culture would grow up to be a gay man, almost certainly, he's showing those signs of being what any teacher who is used to little kids knows, and will, if they're being honest, they will tell you they have seen it. Like when I talk to primary school teachers, they'll say, yeah, I can see which little boys I expect to grow up gay. Those little boys, they see those little boys and they know this is not going to grow up to be the head of a household, to, marry, have kids, do what he's meant to do. And so they say he's going to live in the manner of a woman. They don't mean he is a woman. It's a third category. There was a wonderful thing that happened a few years ago when Laurel Hubbard, who's again, he's a middle-aged, white, rich American New Zealander, and he was a moderately successful weightlifter, and then he had an almost career-ending injury. He really badly hurt his elbow. And then in his late 40s, or I think it was his late 40s, might even have been his 50s, he went to the Olympics in Tokyo. And the Olympics team for New Zealand includes the Pacific Islands and others. And normally the weightlifters on the women's category are these incredibly strong Pacific Island girls of 18, 19, 20. And here's this middle-aged, very unfit bloke who's had a very serious injury, and he was stronger than all of them. And at the time, the president of Samoa said, why are they doing this to us? If they want to say, why are they sending their Fa'afafines to compete against our women? This is not fair on our women. If they want the Fa'afafines to compete, they can compete, So they don't see them as women. And Hijra, it's a somewhat different story. Some of the boys who become Hijra, it's not voluntary. They're boys who get castrated and put into service in temples. It's actually a human rights abuse. And the Mouche, I know less about the Mouche, but I think it's quite like the Fa'afafine story. So all of these are testaments to gender conformity rather than evidence of gender nonconformity. Gender nonconformity is women being able to tell men to stuff off and, own property after they get married and keep their children if their man leaves them and study what the hell they like and become leaders and so on. And none of those societies had any of that.
And you've also brought something to mind that I haven't thought about before. In these other cultures, they're always male.
Yeah, so there's a principle in anthropology or sociology that you can identify out of privilege, but you can't identify into privilege. Like if women could identify into male privileges, we'd all do it. Like every woman who's about to be sold off by her brother or her father into marriage at age 13, 14, 18 to some man she doesn't want, she'd go, oh, I'm a boy, I'm a man. You can't do it to me now. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to identify into privilege. But a man who identifies as Fa'afafine or is recognised as Fa'afafine in Samoa, he's losing the privileges of a man in a patriarchal society. But in return, he can have sex with men without sanction. So that's the trade-off for him. There's only one exception I know of a third gender, that is women. And again, it's very revealing of gender conformity. It's Albanian. It's called something like sworn virgins. And the point is that in traditional Albanian society, there are blood feuds, and it's a super patriarchal society where girls are basically married off by their male relatives, and often quite young, like they're promised very young. And then if a promise of an engagement is broken, that starts a blood feud. And the way those work is, a man or boy from one family kills one from the other family, kills back, and the whole family can be slaughtered. So there has to be something you can do if a woman doesn't or can't marry when she's been promised. And the trick that they found to get around that is that she can swear to be a virgin for the rest of her life. And then she's allowed to have some of the privileges of a man. For example, she can inherit land when a woman can't. But she has to give up any possibility of living as a woman in the sense of reproductively as a woman in return. So you see, when you actually look into the details of all these things, you realise that just going, oh, there have always been trans people, mouches, sword virgins, like it's actually the exact opposite. When you look at these things, you see how rigid gender roles were. Like we're the least rigid gender roles you could imagine that there's ever been anywhere in all of history. Like it's never been the case that leaders of tribes, have been sometimes men and sometimes women and so on, like we have. And then, how are we pretending that men can become women and women can become men at the same time? I have to say, I feel, women got so close. You said you thought we'd got there, and we kind of had, like my generation did. We were able to wear what we liked and...
Even me, I'm 30, right? Like, so I was, playing with dinosaurs and I don't know if this is relevant, but I just remember coming out at 15. Like that's so much younger than all the lesbians I know today. Most people have come out late 20s or, most kids are coming out, 20. I was the only bloody lesbian in my school. I was the only but I wasn't the only tomboy though.
Yeah, you'd wonder. See some of the other ones, wouldn't you? I mean, I was born in 1968, so I am 56. And I would say that my generation, and this was in Ireland as well, but my generation absolutely got it right on a lot of things about girls and boys, but not about sexuality. So we were, we weren't overly sexualized and pornified the way girls are now. Like, it couldn't be more different from the culture where teenage girls now, wear fake tan and get their lips plumped and go around in really short skirts and feel they have to be Instagram ready all the time. That there was none of that. And a lot of the clothing was very gender neutral, lots of dungarees. And it was before the use of pink and blue to code girls' and boys' toys for marketing. Like, it just wasn't a thing. Like, there was no such thing as the girls' version of Lego in pink and purple, And that was great. We had a lot of freedom that children now, boys and girls, it seems to me, don't. But I can tell you that I didn't know anybody who admitted openly that they were gay. Obviously, I must have known gay people until I had finished my degree in Ireland and I came to England. So what year was that? 91. And my accommodation, I was doing a year's postgrad at Cambridge. And in my accommodation, there was a young woman who mentioned that she was lesbian to me. And I was like, wow. Never anyone say that before. And I was 22 and I went to an all-girls school. Like the chance that I had no lesbian, classmates and people in that school was literally zero, but it had literally never occurred to me before. Now that, again, I was Irish and, we at least were very repressed on the subject of sexuality. I have two sons and one is gay. And he said it to me when he was he 12 or was he 13 that he thought he was gay? And it came as zero surprise to me. And it was just not even a thing. Like, it was just like, oh, okay, yeah, you don't surprise me, sort of thing. But there still aren't very many gay kids. He's out of school now. He's finished school. He didn't come across other gay boys. They were all non-binary and trans. Like, there weren't gay kids, just trans.
We talked before about gay people sort of don't fit the feminine gender role and can be gender non-conforming. And now it kind of sounds like, I just want to clarify your point, that a young gay woman essentially believe they might be the opposite sex because they don't fit the gender role of a woman.
That's the narrative, isn't it? I mean, lessons in school are, anybody can be a boy, anybody can be a girl. How do you know? Oh, it's your gender identity. Well, how do you know your gender identity? Well, you check how you feel. But against what? Like, could my gender identity be fish? Could it be chair? Could it be... It's all about the things that are associated with boy or girl. So it's got to be stereotypes. And in fact, the gender clinics all over the world, they've been seeing little boys on and off for about 30, 40 years, rarely. Really exclusively boys that they understood were almost all going to grow up gay. And the point was just to support their parents and stop their parents from being absolute arses to them until they hit puberty and could work out what it was that made them different. They didn't start seeing any girls until about 2010. There just weren't any teenage girls. And the first teenage girls they saw, they noticed there was a really massive overrepresentation of girls who said that they were same-sex attracted. So we're talking about teenagers now, so not little kids. And the two groups, there were three groups, I would say, that were hugely overrepresented in the gender clinics. And they were same-sex attracted, comorbidities, as they say. So kids who are depressed, anxious, self-harming, eating disorders, that sort of thing, and autistic. Or autistic spectrum disorder, often all of them. And now this whole thing has gone out into the wider culture, and now it's not even gender non-conforming kids. Like, it's just, I especially the ones who say they're non-binary, they're just saying I'm not like other girls, you know?
Well, I agree with that. But even non-binary, it seems to be, political signalling, I think.
Yes.
Because it's a lot of non-binary people aren't, or that use they, them pronouns, aren't gender non-conforming in the slightest.
No, and they don't have to be, by the way. Like, nobody has to be. I sometimes people think that I want people to fit into stereotypes, and I think they shouldn't say that they are trans unless they fit into the opposite sex stereotypes. I'm not saying that at all. I want everybody to do what they want. I just don't think you can change sex, and I think that the words man, woman, boy, girl refer to sex. That's all. I mean, I think... I said this thing about the stereotypes for little children are much more painful if you list them for the girls. They're just like, they're kind of not human in a way. It's a doll, like you're describing a doll, not a human being. And that's increasingly true for teenagers. Like, the look that you're meant to have as a teenage girl, like, it's just extraordinary. I mean, I'm always amazed when I stand outside the school and look at kids coming out, and the girls just look, I mean, honestly, it's a quite porn aesthetic, frankly. And suppose you're just, that is just not you. So why would that not be you? Well, I think it's pretty much impossible if you're gender non-conforming. It may be that you politically disapprove of it, which I completely agree with. Or it might be that you think that it's unattainable for you because you think you're too fat or too ugly or too spotty or too unpopular or whatever, that you're a loser, and you've internalized all those things and you think, I can't do it. Well, then you're not a girl, because that's what girls are. And so you identify as something else. Whereas I want to say the opposite. I want to say, of course you're a girl. You do you and show the world what a girl can be. A girl can be anything. But they feel that girls can only be this little, narrow, tiny little thing. And if they don't want to be that little, narrow, tiny little thing, which is very linked to porn, they're not a girl.
I just want to understand this sort of shift, because we talked about how, gender was expanding. Women have freedom to wear pants, work with men, work and general work outside the house. What do you think caused this sort of shift to we've expanded the sort of narrative of what a woman can do to now it's
if you don't do the things that women do, you're not a woman. Like, it's exactly the reverse.
Yeah.
I mean, it has. I think it's a lot of different elements that all came at the same time. I don't think we can overlook the fact that it was a way to put women back in our boxes. Like, women had made so many gains. And now, instead of continuing to build on those gains, we're having to fight to just keep the most basic thing. Like, just the fact that we exist as a class, that we are a group, that there is such a thing as a woman and it's not a fantasy in a man's head. I mean, I don't know if you read any of the things that are written by some of the really high profile trans women like Andrea Long Chu. Have you come across him?
No. No.
Okay, so he's an American journalist who's written very high profile essays and won a Pulitzer Prize for his writings. And he says that what female means is an expectant asshole and blank, blank eyes. That he calls female any operation that subjugates the self in order to make space for the desires of another. The book is called Females a Concern. And it describes blow up dolls and porn, basically. And that is what a woman is. I mean, if the only way of being a woman is what Andrea Long Chu thinks is a woman, I'll be non-binary, thanks. But actually, I just reject entirely his vision of what it is to be a woman. And there are other trans writers who write like this too. I mean, it's amazing to me that this counts as progressive. Like this person won a prize for this. Like he says that it's sissy porn that made him trans. That's a direct quote. Sissy porn did make me trans. That is what he says. And then he gets a prize for it. So yeah, there's just, woman hatred is eternal. And this is the latest version of it.
I suppose what I'm trying to understand is, this idea of, gender, what you're just saying from this person, or even this idea that you can pick your gender or gender supersedes sex. It doesn't make sense. We're talking about it now. I just don't think people have thought about it enough. But I suppose my question is, this idea is incongruent with biological reality and it doesn't make sense. Why do you think it's gained so much prominence in our culture?
Yeah, so one reason I think is that, it's extremely useful for woman hating. And another reason is that it seems like an escape for women from woman hating. Like if you're allowed to identify out of being a woman, if being a woman means being an expectant asshole and blank, blank eyes, and someone says, you could be non-binary, well, yeah, let's do that. So that's part of the reason, but I don't think we can overlook either the role of the internet and in particular social media. So it has never anywhere in the history of humanity been the case that children have been left to educate each other without adult input and oversight. And that did not happen until the rise of social media. And spaces like Tumblr in particular, and now TikTok, but Tumblr from say early 2010s, Tumblr was a place where teenage girls could congregate in something like the female equivalent of the island and the Lord of the Flies, totally away from adults. And, the great thing and the terrible thing about being a teenager is that you're really experimental and you're not very grounded in reality. Like you're trying everything out. You're changing your name, you're changing your hair color, you're dropping friends, you're thinking, you're joining different tribes. But this has to be constrained by being in a family, in institutions like churches or schools or whatever. But in Tumblr, it was just teenage girls. And don't you know the book, The Lord of the Flies? I mean, it's about boys who get dropped on an island. Yeah. And so, that's what boys will be like if there's no adult. They quickly spiral off into, violence and tribalism. Well, what do girls spiral off into? I mean, it became, a lot of eating disorder promotion, which Tumblr took ages to clean up, but also a lot of almost a stamp collecting attitude to gender. Like people talking about what is your gender, if you haven't questioned your gender, and awful, awful medical misdiagnosis. And this is all happening with children in their bedrooms and their parents downstairs not even knowing that their kids are doing this. So when kids come out as trans to their parents, they have been radicalizing online and self-radicalizing and radicalizing other kids for ages beforehand. They've learned a whole load of scripts that have been created exclusively in teenage groups. And those scripts are remarkably hermetic. They're sealed and hard to get into for anyone who's outside them because they just make no sense because they've just been created by teenagers. So yeah, I don't think any of this could ever have happened if we hadn't accidentally allowed teenagers to create an entirely hermetically sealed subculture on social media.
Yeah. Okay. I have a few more questions to sort of wrap the conversation up. And I know we've talked a lot about. I mean, yeah, what you're saying all sounds very logical. I suppose where I'm at is I'm just more interested in relationships and just being compassionate to people. And I'm a youth worker as well, and there just are bigger issues than, kids thinking they're the opposite gender. And whenever I work with a non-binary or trans person, it's just like, it's not on my radar because there's so much going on. Maybe it's slightly different in their situation because they've been taken away from their family and they're in residential care. I suppose what I want to ask here is, can we sort of coexist while having these different understandings of what it means to be a woman? Or different concepts of gender? Like, how do we sort of coexist while people have these different views? I know you said before we've got to advocate for women's rights, we need to be able to define what a woman is.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, what's the end? What's the end? What's an acceptable end goal here? Basically, I do think, by the way, it is a problem if kids are identifying as trans and non-binary, because, like, if they're doing it in a playful way and it's just the latest thing they're trying on, so it's Goth 2.0, that's great. Anything playful in your teens is great. If it's about rejecting their bodies or doing things that are not safe. So if a girl identifies as a boy and she thinks that means it's a good idea for her to go into men's spaces, she's putting herself at risk. And if identifying as a boy means she binds her breasts or looks for hormones online, that's not safe either. So to the extent that it's playful, great. To the extent that it's concretized on the body, really not great. And also, it's just very sexist as well. Like, it'd be better. There's a better way to conceive of this playfulness, which is that I hold all ideas about myself lightly. I'm still under construction as a teenager. Like, that's what I'd like kids to think. However, setting that aside, what could an end goal be? I think we have to think about ideas about gender identity, trans as belief systems. And the thing is, in a liberal democracy like we live in, we know how to deal with people having different belief systems, which is we have freedom of belief. It's one of the foundational human rights. It's there in the UN Charter. It's there in the European Convention. It's been domesticated in European countries' laws. In the UK, it's the Human Rights Act. So you can, within very wide bounds, you can believe what you choose to believe. What you can't do is impose that belief on other people or do things because of your belief that are too harmful to other people. And there's a whole load of worked out case law on that. So, for example, a person who's a Jehovah's Witness can reject a life-saving blood transfusion. That's fine. It's their right. What they can't do is do that on the behalf of their minor child. And that was decided in court. That that's just too much freedom of religion, freedom of belief. So if someone wants to believe something about themselves that's counterfactual, people do that all the time. I'm surrounded by people who believe different things than me. I don't believe in astrology. I don't believe in homeopathy. I'm an atheist. I absolutely think that, socialism is idiotic. I have a whole set of beliefs. And that's fine. I'm not imposing them on other people. And I don't want other people to impose their beliefs on me. So if a man wants to believe he's a woman, he's very welcome to believe he's a woman. I'm not going to say it. And he can't come into spaces that are for women only because that harms women. But he can do it all he likes on his own time. And we've got to get to there. We've got to remember, it took us a long time to get freedom of belief, to understand how that worked. There were the Crusades. There were people who tried to force other people to convert at knife point, at gunpoint, burn people alive for believing the wrong thing. And then we realised that that's a bad way to live. The good way to live is freedom of belief. And we have to get this one in there too.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you just quickly raised another question for me. I know, when people transition to the opposite sex, I know a lot of transgender people that have transitioned and they feel it alleviates their suffering and that it's made them happier. I mean, I suppose, do you still believe people should be able to do that?
It depends. I mean, I don't know what exactly that you mean, because, nobody transitions to the other sex. We can't actually change sex.
Yeah. But you know what I mean.
People are, it's a wide range. Like, if they're taking hormones, I guess as an adult, if you want to take hormones and you really understand what the downsides will be, I don't have a strong position on that. I don't think it's very wise, by the way. I think the human body is a pretty impressive organism that it's not a great idea to stick spanners in. But, I'm not the boss of everybody. I think a lot of the operations are quite badly missold. And I think I would want to know a lot more about regret rates. Like, we're starting to see a lot of women who had mastectomies quite young and are now realizing that they actually want to have kids and they can't breastfeed, or that, they have painful scars, or that it didn't make them look as like a man as they thought it would. It's an area of cosmetic surgery that has not got either great outcomes or good information for patients. And there's a lot of people offering things, like, judging from what I see people talking about online and in, especially if you go and look at Reddit forums, there's a lot of people who are not happy with the outcomes of the surgeries. If somebody's doing something that alleviates their own suffering, yeah, I get that. Of course I do. Again, I just come back to, but don't impose it on other people. A woman-only space cannot have some men in it, because that's a mixed sex space. So, if you think that what will alleviate your suffering is forcing everybody else to pretend you've changed sex, well, I'm sorry, you can't do that. That's like saying, alleviating my religious beliefs will be to force everybody else to believe that Jesus Christ died and rose again. Too bad. Maybe it would make you feel better. I'm not going to do it.
But do you think, I just want to clarify, like, in situations, because obviously I can't imagine you would have a problem with a trans woman at a bar or something.
Oh God, no, of course not.
No, you don't even have a problem with transgender women. It's when when it comes in conflict with rights.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm absolutely all for everybody having all the same human rights. Nobody deserves to be harassed on the street, to not be able to access services. Everybody deserves good healthcare. Everybody has to be able to rent a room. Everybody should be served at the bar, etc., etc. And any reasonable adjustments as well should be made. But again, the framework of freedom of belief gets that. Like, there's just this amazing amount of worked out law about, what is it reasonable to ask your employer to do for Muslim colleagues, for Jewish colleagues, for special holidays, etc., etc. It's the same as that. If it's reasonable, we'll make an adjustment. And if it's not reasonable, we can't accommodate it.
Yeah, it does sound like I mean, to wrap it up, the coexistent. Yeah. Because the idea is here, right?
We can't put it back in its box. For all I think it's a bad sexist idea, I think loads of ideas are bad and sexist. I'm not trying to stop people from doing them. I'm not the boss of the world.
There are some circumstances where we need to acknowledge biological reality and, sex is real. Yeah. And for you, it's women's spaces and...
Well, single-sex spaces generally. I mean, men deserve their privacy too. Obviously, sports. I don't think we should be teaching children very sexist ideas. Like, if children find their way to the idea that they were meant to be the opposite sex themselves as they grow older, I can't stop them. But I would not actively teach them that, you can't tell who's a boy or who's a girl by looking at their bodies. That's a very bad idea to be teaching people. I mean, it's creating, bodily disease. That's just not a great idea. But generally speaking, people can believe what they want about themselves or the world, but they can't impose upon other people's rights.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't know, it's been really nice to talk to you. I feel like it's been like just a normal conversation, but
it's quite a normal belief. Most people believe what I believe. I know it maybe doesn't seem it to you in your circles, but I mean, the great majority of humanity still believes what I believe and always has.
You would be considered God, I hate the word TERF, but it's like,
I don't mind.
Melody, why? But no, for me, it's like, why are you talking to a TERF? And I'm like, you just don't come across as a bad person to me. I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying.
I mean, the bubble is the one that you're in, by the way. You asked me about the bubble. You're in the bubble.
I'm
Opinion
in the bubble.
Polls show that hardly anyone agrees with the sorts of beliefs that your friends believe.
I don't think I'm in an Echochamber because I'm talking to you, right?
Yeah, but you're unusual in that. Well done to you for talking outside your bubble. Very, very few people seriously believe that anything I've said is wrong.
But we want
anyone who thinks that I'm a bad person for what I've said, they're in a bubble.
We want to conserve relationships, and I always wonder about that too. I want to conserve relationships, but I want to have. It's meaningful to have these kind of conversations, and it's meaningful to figure out how we can exist with others that have different beliefs. My understanding of a lot of transgender people that I know, I think that they do genuinely have a hard time in society, and I worry about minimizing their experience or you making them feel bad. And I think I just think
you have to think about compassion for everybody. I mean, we really have centered the trans person in certain conversations. Like, there's all these things written about how awful it is for male athletes who want to compete as female ones. and almost nothing written about how it feels for every woman in that conversation, in that competition, you know? So I just want to remember everybody here, thanks, including the half of humanity that really does need to keep men out of the women-only spaces. There's enough compassion to go around, surely.
I agree. I'm wondering how we can just keep elevating these sort of conversations. Or maybe that's it, just having these sort of conversations. But I think
remember, it is. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think anyone on my side objects to having these conversations, but let's see what you get from the other side.
I don't want to be called hateful, you know? It's just the worst
Well, you have to
thing.
take that risk. You know, believe it, I don't want to be called hateful either. I just got used to it. Because either I shut up or I got called hateful and I wasn't going to shut up. No. By the way, I'm the most gender non-conforming woman you could have in some ways. The gender conforming thing for women is to shut the fuck up and let men have what they want. And I refuse to do that. So, you know, anyone who says that they approve of gender non-conformity should be approving of me there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great tagline. Opener. Yeah, what you just said. It's gender. Like, I don't shut the fuck up either. What is it? It's disagreeableness.
Exactly. And that is a stable sex difference. Women are more agreeable, but I'm not particularly agreeable, and I doubt you are either. So
no, definitely not. Oh well, what's next for you, Helen? What are you working on at the moment? Another book or?
I haven't really started a second book, and my agent and my publisher my editor have given up on me, I think. It's just too busy. I mean, there's just so much that needs fixing because so much went wrong by trying to, you know, impose this counterfactual idea of gender identity over sex, overriding sex in laws and so on. So I spend my days mostly working for Sex Matters, which is a charity that supports the human rights that require you to recognise that there are two sexes. And that's what we work on. So that's what I spend most of my time doing.
And where can people find you or find your work?
Sure. So I tweet at @HJoyceGender, and I have a website at thehelenjoyce.com.
Cool. I'll put all those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me. I think it's been a really...
Thanks for having me on, Melody.
Yeah, it's been a really cool conversation. All right, see ya.